Hello and welcome to another video by Enterprise Software Solutions, your number one software dudes. Please remember to subscribe to our channel for our latest videos and updates. Today we're going to talk about how you can use the Azure Total Cost of Ownership calculator to determine what it would cost for you to migrate your existing workloads from your current environment up into Azure. Now, the calculator is a pretty simple thing to start off with in theory, right? You just put in your workloads and you kind of adjust some assumptions and you get a report out that tells you what you would save, if anything, if you went and migrated to the cloud. Now, where that kind of breaks down is you have to have a very good understanding of what your environment looks like. So you're going to go through for each type of server or configuration you have. You're going to create an item that's described, what kind of workload is it? Is it a Windows Linux server? Do you want to migrate that to a web app instead? Is it physical? Is it virtual? Is it Windows? What kind of licensing are you paying for? Standard or enterprise, you have GPUs, how many cores, how many servers, the configuration of those servers, all the things about that. And then go through and put this in here. And then you just kind of add as you go through. So I've got some AD servers, some IS servers, app 1, app 2, app 3 in here. So I got about 50-ish servers, I think, kind of give you a small, medium-sized workload of what that would look like. So this is the time-intensive part, is going through and figuring out how do you want to organize and configure your input into the tool. Then moving down to databases, same kind of thing. Is it Microsoft SQL? Is it Postgres? Is it MySQL? Is it Oracle? What kind of licensing do you have? Virtual physical machines? And then how do you want to operate that in the cloud? Do you want to run that as SQL on a VM, just like you do currently? Do you want to use a database managed instance? Do you want to go to SQL managed services and you vCore licensing or DTU licensing? Go through, put all that in there, figure out, what you're currently doing, what you're looking for, and then just add each database type as you're going. So in this case, I've got SQL Server going to managed instance, and I've got a Postgres going to a Azure Postgres managed instance. So then your storage, right? So is it local storage on SSDs, HDDs? Is it NAS file share? Is it blob? How much of it do you have? How much is it backed up? What's your archive policy for it? How many IOPS do you need? Et cetera, et cetera. Fill all that out, figure out that, make sure you have that appropriately sized. And your final thing is networking, right? How much networking are you using outbound? So I've got, like I said, a mix of servers, both physical, VMware, Hyper-V, multiple database options, 10 terabytes of stuff, kind of ran through. What's that going to cost us? Now, the second most important part is modifying the adjustments that Microsoft provides in this tool. So they use a lot of quote unquote average values for the cost of IT staff, the cost of power, what a cost of server is, what the cost of licensing is. So you need to go through here and figure out, do you want to use GRS? Are you using software assurance? Are your virtual machine costs going to be burstable? I would typically say enable this to not recommend them because, worst case scenario, burstable isn't useful for everything. Are you really paying 13-ish cents per kilowatt hour, or is it cheaper, more expensive for you? Is your storage cost really 40 cents a gig for SSD? Do you really pay $160 for tape drives? What's the number of servers? Are you higher or lower than this? What's your hourly rate for an IT administrator? I feel like, you need to know what your costs are already to make sure that you're getting a good value out of this. And your final assumptions down here is, this is much more nitty gritty, right? What are you actually paying for your SQL licensing, your Microsoft licensing, or what are you actually paying for virtualization? If you dig into that, here's their value. Is this your value? Is your average utilization higher or lower than 80%? What is your VMware licensing cost, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll take you a while to kind of go through and figure out, what do I have? How do I want to migrate it? How do I want to configure it? And then figure out, what am I actually paying for? What are my costs? All that. This is one of the things where the due diligence and the time and effort that go into it is worth it, because if you don't put good value in, you're not going to get good value out. So then at the end of that, you go through and they'll give you a nice number that says, in this case, with the servers I've inputted the values and using averages from everything, essentially, over 5 years, I'll save $1.2 million if I take that workload and put it up into Azure in North Central US. Now, the important part is, this is different depending on your region. So if I go into Central US, my costs are $200,000 different. And if I go into Korea South, a little bit. India, But what about East Asia, right? That's half the savings for what I currently have in value. Or France South, a whole different number there. So, but once again, though, the average costs of power and IT staff and et cetera are probably also different in those regions as well. So this is why it's very important to make sure you put in the correct values and figure out, proper value. There's also dev option. So if you just are trying to figure out what it would cost to do a dev workload, and then you're using that feature of Azure licensing, you can enable that. So then you get graphs and charts out of this to kind of help break that down. So, and then you can download this, export it, PowerPoint slides, all that good stuff. And then down here is kind of nitty gritty. So, right, on-prem, you have a lot more costs that are available, right, you're responsible for. So, it's electricity, virtualization, database, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all those, whereas in Azure, you're breaking down just a few more categories. And then you can go in here and also break down exactly kind of service comparison. So they're saying, if you've got this storage and you put it on LRS, this is what it's going to look like if you use premium storage for that little bit of high IOP capacity. It's about $2,000, storage maintenance costs, et cetera, et cetera. Get your labor ship costs in there. Networking, your compute, there you go. They're giving you, here's your virtualization, your configuration. Kind of think about this, right? Because the server that you may have on-prem does not necessarily have an equivalent in Azure. It's also why when you're going through the workbook, you need to make sure that your, is CPU optimized application, or is it a, memory optimized configuration. Ensure you're tracking that correctly. So then once you go through all that, you get all the configuration you need out of there. You can download these, you can save them, you can share them. Then if you ever need to come back, you go to My Save Reports. And then here's an example of one I did earlier where there's just a ton of storage. So then I'll tell you, hey, it doesn't look like there's no cost savings. They're at least kind of give you a way to, be honest about it, as it were, and then give you, what you can look at to figure out cost ownership changes and kind of help you figure out if you missed something or need to reconsider something for your RTO. So for me, the big thing was storage, right? The way I put in a bunch of archival, a bunch of GRS storage, so that then put a bigger price over the environment than what I was previously using. So stuff like that, it breaks down, you can figure it out, look at your costs, and determine, some applications, some parts of the environment, things like that. So hope you found this video useful on using the Azure Total Cost of Ownership Calculator. Don't forget that Enterprise Software Solutions is your #1 software dudes. Thank you.